I'm a big believer in second chances, even for people who commit serious crimes. Who deserves a second chance? Who gets one? And who decides? I'm Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host of Just Justice. I'm a former public defender, a professor of justice studies, and an award winning author. And I'm excited for us to find new ways to put justice back into our criminal legal system. Hello, and welcome to Just Justice. My name is Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host. Today, we have the pleasure of talking with Mujahideen Muhammad, an advocate, researcher, scholar, and formerly incarcerated leader working to transform how we think about excessive sentencing, rehabilitation, and second chances. After serving nearly 25 years in prison for serious crimes he committed at the age of 19, Mujahideen returned home in 2024 and immediately began working for change. He's now a research assistant with the Columbia University Center for Justice, where he helps research and write about New York's proposed Second Look Act. He's also the co-founder of the Pillars of Promise, a nonprofit organization that supports incarcerated people and those returning home through mentorship, emotional support, and connections to all sorts of resources. Mujahideen earned a bachelor's degree in behavioral science from Mercy College, a master's degree in ministry and leadership from Union Theological Seminary, and is currently pursuing an executive master of public administration at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. Mujahideen, welcome to Just Justice.
Thank you, Jessica Henry. I appreciate being on the show with you and getting the opportunity to talk about my experiences with incarceration and my advocacy for the Second Look Act.
We're so excited to have this conversation. Why don't we just jump in? You spent nearly 25 years in prison and you only recently were released back in 2024. And so I'm wondering, just before we get started in some of the work that you're doing now, what was the biggest adjustment for you returning to society after all those years incarcerated?
The biggest adjustment is the one that I'm still making, and that's how to balance my work life and personal life, how to make sure I'm attending to self-care. Because I was fortunate that upon my return to society, I immediately got employed. A month into my reentry, I was hired to be a researcher at the Center for Justice, and a bunch of opportunities and resources opened up to me. And I began to apply the work ethic that I built inside while incarcerated, you know, to to my approach in society. And so I became busy and active very quickly. I became immersed in advocacy and research um, very quickly, and I haven't tended enough to my self care. I haven't spent as much time as I thought I would with family, So I think balancing it out is something that I'm still working on, and also related to that, not overextending myself because I came home with so much empathy for the men and women I was leaving behind. And Allah blessed me to be in a position where I have resources that I can leverage to their benefit. So I know I can do a lot. I'm in a position to do a lot, but at the same time, it's kind of like realizing you can't help everybody, that you need to start, attending more to your personal affairs. So that's something that I'm still struggling with. But I do know that it's necessary.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the truth of it is everybody struggles with finding work-life balance. And I think you're right. For you, you have so much energy, so much vision. It sounds like so much care for the folks you left behind and such an idea about what the future could look like that you're just going forward with as much energy as you can. And you're right, you got to take care of yourself. I think but that is a challenge I think everybody listening probably can relate to on some level. You did get this job at Columbia University's coming right out of prison, which is pretty unusual, pretty impressive. And I'm wondering, can you take us back while you were in prison? You found education, right? You found educational opportunities. And can you tell us um, how education shaped your experience while you were in prison?
It wasn't until I did 24 and a half years incarcerated. It wasn't until around my 12th year that I really started to apply myself and take advantage of the educational opportunities that were around me. I was at Sing Sing Correction Facility at the time. And Sing Sing Correction Facility is one of the few facilities in New York State that stands out because of their abundance of empowering programs. You can go to Sing Sing and go from a GED to a master's degree. Other programs like rehabilitation through the arts. They have a range of programs that allow individuals who want to improve themselves to seek participation in. And it took me about 5 years after being in Sing Sing before I decided I'm ready. I really need to improve myself through education because I was languishing spiritually, mentally. I was still dealing with my underlying issues. So it didn't click immediately. It clicked um about halfway through my incarceration. And it took me 4 years to get into the Mercy College Hudson Link program at Sing Sing Correction Facility. And when I finally did get in, I really appreciated the opportunity because I always believed I had and displayed, academic excellence. But there was a lot of issues that I had with regard to my values that didn't allow me, to realize my educational potential. So when I finally got into college, I felt like this was my moment to really develop this capacity that I showed, but never had the opportunity to develop. And I just took advantage of every class, every assignment, and I was one of the guys that really appreciated the college education experience inside. It gave me a sense of efficacy, a sense of self actualization. I didn't have a lot of life experiences, so it was really the first. It was really the only thing that I became competent in, and so it did a lot for my identity. I began to think of myself as a learner, and I began to think of my future in education as a result.
Catch us up a little bit. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Queens, but I bounced around a lot. Had my share of childhood adversity growing up. I was born in the crack era. My mother and some members of my family, like a lot of like a lot of people in underserved communities during that time were affected, by the crack era. And so I bounced around a lot. I was in foster care for 3 years, and then I lived with my grandmother for another 6 years. So I bounced a lot around New York City when I was young. But I would say that I have a lot of gratitude towards my mother because she recovered around the time when I was 11 years old, and she got me and my sisters back, and she's been off drugs ever since, and she's a home. I really appreciate her ability to bounce back from a difficult time and get her children back and be the loving parent that she always wanted to be.
Yeah, that's amazing. That shows a lot of resilience and the power of second chances, the power of transformation, right? Which is what we're really talking about here. And one more thing before we get into what you're doing, you said that when you first came into prison, it took you a little while to kind of embrace some of these programs. What do you think was the switch? What made you say, I don't want to live this way? I don't want to be that kind of person. I want to be this kind of person.
To be honest with you, when I first got incarcerated, I was in a heavy psychological fog. Um, Prior to being arrested at 19 for a serious crime and getting a 25 years of life sentence, I had did 4 years in juvenile residential facilities. That at that time it was called Division for Youth, DFY for short.
Hmm.
And I was only home for 1 year before I committed the serious crime that got me 25 years of life. So when I was on Rikers Island, I was devastated. I couldn't envision doing 25 years. I thought my life was over. And I came upstate with that sentence, still bearing that burden, that weight. and having that sense of guilt that I destroyed my life, and that kind of fog kind of lasted with me for almost like the first half of my incarceration, and it took a lot of willpower to overcome a lot of the psychological issues that I was dealing with, things that preceded my incarceration, things that was aggravated by being incarcerated. So it took me a lot of time to get over those psychological hurdles and take advantage of the opportunities that was available to me, not just academically, but religiously as well, and therapeutically.
Yeah, it sounds like a journey, and it sounds like you have come out stronger and ready, like we said, to do a lot of the work that you're doing right now, which involves, in particular, two things. One is the Second Look Act in New York, which I want to spend some time on. And the second is a nonprofit organization that you have started, Pillars of Promise. But let's first look at the Second Look Act. Can you tell people who are listening who may not be familiar with it, what is the Second Look Act?
The Second Look At is a bill being proposed in the New York State legislature that would allow incarcerated individuals or their legal representatives to petition a judge for a resentencing hearing after 10 years of incarceration. And it would give the judge the authority to use his discretion to resentence applicants based primarily on their ability to show that they have clearly transformed themselves and they no longer pose a threat to society. It's a bill that's sweeping the country incrementally to different degrees. There's 16 states that have second look laws, not including the federal government in Washington, D.C. And there are several states that have passed second look laws in different increments. So this is something that I think is something it's a little bit of a wave that's happening around the country where a lot of courts and legislatures are realizing that we need to revisit these extreme and excessive prison sentences, especially that were a reflection of where we were at in this country, and in bygone eras in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So there's definitely an emphasis on modernizing our sentencing guidelines and rewarding and recognizing those who are clearly transformed themselves and to whom further incarceration is no longer just necessary or appropriate.
Yeah, and so tell me, how did you or the folks that are working on this, how did you come up with this idea of 10 years being the marker at which a person would be eligible to have their sentence reconsidered?
I can't speak exactly to how the legislation is being shaped. I know there's different legal organizations that's made suggestions about the minimum time served or the time requirement. So I can't speak exactly to why it's 10 years. I know most bills don't have a minimum below 15 years.
Right.
So, we'll see what the final outcome is.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I think there's some organizations and groups have advocated for 10. I know DC has 15. Um, and so those are the numbers I've seen as well. I was just curious if you knew sort of who picked 10. And then
What I would say that the Chief Judge Ron Wilson formulated a task force in January 2024, and they issued 15 recommendations, one of which is a 5-year minimum.
hmm,
That was the lowest that I've seen. I was actually shocked when I seen it, but so that number has been out there.
and for the New York version that's being considered, are there exceptions? Are there exclusions? Does it apply to everybody regardless of their crime? Once they've served 10 years, they are eligible for a second look.
Yes. The bill as it exists, Senate Bill 158 and Assembly Bill 1283, they contain no carve outs and no exclusions as it is written today.
And where is it? Like, what's happening with it?
Right now, it's still in the Codes Committee in the Assembly and Senate. It hasn't made its way out of the committee yet. It has to go from the Codes Committee to the Corrections, and then it has to be put on the floor. It has 30 co-sponsors, and it has 30 co-sponsors in the Senate and 63 co-sponsors in the Assembly. But it's really up to Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins and Assembly Majority Leader Carl Heastie for them to, be open towards putting a bill like that on the floor, because it can have the majority sponsors in the Assembly and the Senate. But if the leaders don't feel they have political cover, but they feel like somehow the majority is going to be threatened, or they feel like a certain backlash, they're not going to put it on the floor. So,
Right.
um, but
Welcome to New York politics, right?
yes, there's a lot of politics behind it. But I always tell people, like, because because this outcome is so much based on politics, we can't judge the success of our movement solely on the outcome of it. And what I mean by is that I believe that in order to pass legislation of this nature, and I acknowledge that it's not easy,
Mhm.
it takes a lot of education that has to be done to the wider public to get them to understand, what makes incarcerated people who've committed serious crimes redeemable and worthy of returning to society much earlier than their sentences originally allowed. That takes a lot of education. I understand, I think the fear mongering is unjustified, but I understand why the average person might not be able to process why this bill is necessary. So I always tell people that we have to focus on creating the conditions and the environment that would allow the Second Look Act to pass. And the way we do that is by educating people about, why this bill is necessary, and showing examples of what a second look looks like.
I was gonna say, why don't you take a minute? Here's your moment. Tell everybody why this bill and bills like it are so important. I mean, for most folks, so like if you committed a serious crime, like let's just say murder, well, of course you should be sentenced to prison for the rest of your life. What's your answer to that? What's your argument about why second looks are so important? Why they're justified?
When judges give these sentences that they've been authorized by society to give, and they essentially condemn men and women to life, they really are not factoring, the human capacity to change. And
Yeah.
from my experiences, there are so many men and women who have done the genuine work of transformation, who have looked at to what led to their crimes from circumstantial and environmental factors, identify, the harm that they suffered, and then took steps towards repairing that, therapeutically, and also have really pursued education and learned to mentor and benefit all those around them to the point where everyone can clearly see that they no longer belong in prison. And I think when individuals take those kind of strides, it would be to the betterment of our society that we recognize and that we reward those who have undergone significant transformation, because it would actually be for the betterment of our society. I think there are so many examples, especially amidst mass incarceration. There's so many men and women who are returning to society and as positive contributors, especially since a lot of men and women are returning to society with college education and other types of skills that they didn't have before. And they are now providing, I think, a clear benefit. They now have a clear role in society to the point where I think the work that formerly incarcerated individuals are doing, it should change the perception of the wider public about what we're capable of doing as contributors. There's work that we do that's uniquely fit for us, and our sense of redemption, I think, is something that should be looked at as a huge positive. And I think that the success that so many of us formerly incarcerated men and women have had in society, it should positively reflect on those who remain in prison, who have undergone the same transformation as we all have, but unfortunately they have sentences that do not allow them to be assessed for their readiness to return to society as positive contributing members. So I like to point to it like that, the second look at is about transformations for people understanding the harm they have done and clearly taking the steps to address it and learning how to benefit and serve others. And I think when we reward individuals who have achieved that, then we actually better our community, we actually better society. And that serves a greater benefit than just keeping them in prison with all of the attendant costs that comes with that.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things about the way that we sentence in the United States, right, is we look at a person and what they've done in a singular moment, and then we project in the future, and say, you have forever, you know, forfeited your life. And you don't deserve an opportunity to ever walk the streets again. And there's real evidence that that doesn't make a lot of sense from an economic perspective. It costs a lot of money to keep people in prison forever, and from a human dignity perspective, because to your point, people change. They really
Yeah.
do. They transform. But some critics of these laws also say that these resentencing opportunities, these second look laws, somehow undermine accountability, or create trauma for victims and crime survivors. What do you think about that argument?
I think this is a this is a valid question. And I think anyone who advocates for second looks, they should be they should be able to adequately answer these questions and they shouldn't run from it. Um I believe that not all victims uh want the most punitive outcomes. There are a lot of victims that want accountability from those who harmed them. And like recently, I went back into Green Haven to attend a TEDx kind of event that they had there called Beyond the Block. And two of the incarcerated individuals who spoke talked about their victims reaching out to them. And one particularly was Albert Santana, who he has 40 plus years of life, but early into his incarceration, his victim's mother sent him a postcard saying that she forgave him. And he talked about how that affected the trajectory of his incarceration. He said he was just stunned by it, and it made him realize how much repair he needed to do to himself and how much he needed to be a mentor for the younger men who were coming in to help them transform themselves and return to society as positive contributing members. And then there was another individual named Jose Rodriguez. His whole speech was about one day his victim came up to see him when he was at Green Haven Correctional Facility.
Mm,
He just talked about
wow.
all the emotions that went into that. He couldn't sleep and he was just trying to process how how is this happening? And then when he finally went on a visit and met his victim's mother, he just talked about how he just cried and just told her just how much he was sorry for what he did. So those are just two anecdotal incidents, but there are a lot of instances around this country where there are victims who are willing to engage in restorative justice processes with those that harmed them. And because one of the needs that arise when a harm is done is why is knowledge, and
Mhm, mhm.
the system is not built to where um people who suffer harm could engage with those that harmed them, and importantly, to witness how they have transformed themselves and become accountable for the harm that they have done. And I think if we facilitate more processes where people who suffered harm can see, how the person that's harmed them has evolved, then that can make it more likely that, they can forgive them, that they can reach out to them, and to engage with them and see, and learn from them and why they did what they did and whether they have remorse. And, so I think that's so important that I can't I can't tell someone who's lost a life how they should feel. If
Mhm.
a person chooses to have a sense of vengeance, I can't tell them that they're wrong. But I think what we can do is we can facilitate more restorative justice processes that can bring harm parties and those who've done harm together and see if there can be, if there's some kind of ameliorating process other than just confining a person forever.
Right. Yeah. That was a really powerful answer. I mean, that's all you can do, right? Is do the work the best you can for the harm that you caused and hope that the folks who were harmed have the capacity to join you on your journey and heal, right?
Yeah. And a lot of times they don't know. A lot of times, this is a huge knowledge gap.
Absolutely. I mean, that's built into the legal system. Judges, might issue a restraining order. Defense attorneys tell their clients not to say anything so that it's not seen as an admission of guilt. The prosecution also, says to the folks who are the surviving family members, like, don't talk to anybody about this. So yeah, there's these structures in place that are designed to keep people apart. And there
And
is a knowledge void that's painful for the folks who have been harmed.
and the harm that that does is that it allows people who suffered harm to see these individuals through the same lens that they see them in at the initial commission of the crime.
Mhm.
So their lens
Right.
never changes.
They're frozen in time forever, right. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting thing the way that we punish people and the way that we don't create processes for people to heal and transform better, right? We really make it difficult. Now, one of the things that you did, perhaps in recognition of how hard things can be, is you started an organization called Pillars of Promise, I'm sorry. Um, and the work that you do is you support incarcerated people who are in prison, and those who are returning home. So it's twofold. You don't just focus on the folks who are returning home, but you also focus on the folks who are still incarcerated. And I'm wondering, what is it that Pillars of Promise does specifically? And why did you create it? What kind of gaps did you see that needed filling?
I particularly lean into the the mentorship that we provide to the men and women inside. And I feel like it's so important that what we try to do is stay in communication with the men and women inside, and that serves a lot of different purposes. We get opportunity to learn from them, how best to advocate for them. And also because of the resources that we have and the advocacy that we're doing, we're able to relate to them accurate information about the progress of sentencing reform and criminal legal system reform as a whole. Because we know in prison, sometimes there's a lot of misinformation running rampant, so we're able to act as a conduit in that respect. And another important goal of the Pillars of Promise is to try to create outlets for the men and women to lend their voices and their views to these discussions out here around sentencing reform. And I think that's so important because there's so many astute men and women who are inside who've thought real deeply about themselves, about society, about the criminal legal system. Uh, a lot of them are college educated, and they have a lot to say and to contribute. And what we have done at the Pillars of Promise is try to create, outlets for those men and women to engage the wider public, show the wider public who they are, how they transform, what they have to contribute. I think that's so much a part of advocating for a second look is that we able to put faces and names to these reforms. So the Pillars of Promise, we created a blog on our website, www.thepillarsofpromise.com for incarcerated writers. And it's been receiving very good feedback. And we're in the process of turning that blog into a book. With early discussions behind that. And so I just think that's so much of an important part of what we do is trying to find ways to for the men and women to contribute while they're inside so people can see their value and who they are. And the third thing we have done is just try to leverage all of the resources that we've had to the benefit of incarcerated men and women inside, particularly those serving extreme prison sentences. We've helped numerous individuals with getting lawyers for their clemency applications, wrongful convictions. During the strike that during the aftermath of the Robert Brooks murder and the strike that occurred in New York State correctional facilities. It was a huge humanitarian crisis, and we was able to leverage our relationships, on behalf of the men and women inside, trying to get them relief by appealing to different people in our network and government. So that's another part of what we're able to do, just leverage our resources. I'm at Columbia University at the Center for Justice. I'm part of a prison education program. So I help in developing programs that are implemented inside. So it's a range of things that we try to do. And I realize that there are a lot of us. We have to realize the power that we have when we return to society and we're in these networks. There's a lot of good we can do for those that we left behind if we realize it.
Yeah, and there's so much you just said that I wanna, like we need another show. This is crazy. So I love we will absolutely link to your organization on the show notes, so folks can find you, and I love the idea of publishing the voices of folks who are inside in a book. That sounds amazing, and even on a blog to because it is true, these are folks with real experience and knowledge about what we're talking about. And the second thing that you mentioned was the humanitarian crisis that took place in New York because frankly conditions in prison are not good on a good day, and there was a period of time where they were really bad. And just again, because some of our listeners just don't know about it, can you tell us a little bit about what you were seeing? What sort of what is happening in prison conditions and what was happening then? Just briefly, um, because I don't know that everyone will know what you're talking about.
It's actually the humanitarian crisis is something that's not particular to New York. It's been happening all across the country as a result of staff shortages in correctional facilities. But
Mhm.
briefly, in December of 2024, an incarcerated individual, Robert Brooks, was murdered in at Bossy Correctional Facility, brutally murdered. It was caught on the body cam.
On video. I mean, it's unbelievable. They beat this man horrifically and tried to throw him out a window, and the whole thing was captured on their own video.
Yes. So when the indictments came down, coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, corrections officers they went on a strike, and the correctional New York State correctional system was already under a lot of stress. They with regard to having the adequate amount of staffing, and when the officers went on strike, that really it threw it into a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
I spent 15 years in Sing Sing Correctional Facility. Most of the guys I'm in communication with are in Sing Sing, and I got so many emails that I've preserved on Google Docs of men just talking about the harrowing conditions that they were suffering for that extensive period of time.
Mm.
20 hours locked in their cells, not getting showers, not able to go to get the proper medical treatment. And it was bad packages. It was really there were a lot of guys who compared it to the conditions pre 1971 Attica riot. The conditions
Wow.
that
Yeah.
it was very depressing. And one of the most depressing things, and it says a lot, one of the things that guys was depressed the most about was not having the ability to engage in rehabilitative programs. I had one friend who was just crushed. He was psychologically crushed because he could no longer engage in a type of programming that gave him a sense of healing, that made him feel good about himself. And to me, that was one of the most distressing things that happened during that humanitarian crisis. And to add that you, they Governor Kathy Hochul had to employ thousands of thousands of state troopers, I mean state
Yeah.
National Guards, excuse me,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
who are still in the facilities, because the staffing shortage is that bad, and there are still some facilities that's not functioning optimally with staffing, and a lot of incarcerated individuals are paying because of that.
Yeah. You know, yeah, you were talking about these rehabilitative programming. What do you think? Like, what's your vision? What would it really mean to have functioning prisons and rehabilitative programs? Like, what's the ideal scenario? Shorter prison sentences, less folks staying in for the rest of their lives, and then what? What would prison really do? Um, to make it be a more effective space if that's if that's even a possibility.
I think I think ideally what I would like to see is for prisons to be based on a rehabilitative measure, not care and control, but rehabilitative measure. And that docs would allow more transformative programming to be available to the wider public, allow organizations out in the community to come in and facilitate those kind of therapeutic and educational programs. I think a prison or a facility just based solely where that is the main goal, that we're doing everything we can to facilitate transformation. And I think the problem with our sentencing structure is that it doesn't allow any assessment on the back end. I think as long as there's a fair assessment on the back end of a sentence, um, I think that's appropriate. Not necessarily we have to have short sentences, that we just have to have fair review after, a substantial amount of time. I think that's what's most important.
Right, and there's a lot of people, in New York, there was some parole reform, um, but, a lot of states don't have parole at all. Their parole boards don't release anyone, and so even the idea of having a parole review, to your point, isn't necessarily a fair review or isn't necessarily one that results in release, um, which again goes why back to the larger question about the Second Look Act that you've been working so hard to get past. Um, you know, one of the ways you and I connected is over LinkedIn. And you had, I mean, I think we've been in a little bit, in contact. You had posted about a book that I really love called Miller's Children by James Garbarino. And when I saw that post, I think you and I started talking, and then we realized, like, oh, like, why don't you come on the show as a guest? And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the significance of that book. I know that you had a book group in Sing Sing that actually read that book. So tell me about that experience.
I attribute a lot to Miller's Children, written by James Garbarino, in the book club that we based on that. And Dr. Geraldine Downey, she studied under Yuri Bronfenbrenner, and she studied along with James Garbarino. They both studied under Yuri Bronfenbrenner, and they both Dr. Geraldine Downey.
And who is that? Who's Dr. Geraldine Downey?
She's the director at the Center for Justice at Columbia University. She was my psychology professor when I was at Sing Sing Correctional Facility.
Okay.
And so her and James studied under Yuri Bronfenbrenner in Cornell University. And so that was where the connection was there. And she used to come inside and tell me and my peers about this book, that we have to read this book called Miller's Chosen by James Garbarino. We have to read this book. So one day she convinced me and two of my other close peers, Michael Teneo and Salahuddin Tate and Townsley. She convinced us to facilitate a book club about Miller's Children, and she thought it would be very beneficial. So that's what we did. It was supervised by her, Dr. Geraldine Downey, and my colleague, Dr. Noah Rimnick, who's also a professor and lecturer at the Center for Justice at Columbia University. And the book, it to me, it was something that I needed, that we all needed, because Miller's Children book, written by James Garbarino, is based on the Millers versus Alabama decision, I believe in 2012, which made mandatory life without parole sentences unconstitutional for juveniles. And James Garbarino, he was an expert witness for a lot of juveniles who were being tried for murder. And when the Millers versus Alabama decision came down, there were about between 2 and 3,000 people who became eligible for being resentenced. And James Garbarino represented a lot of those individuals who are now eligible for being resentenced due to the Millers versus Alabama decision. And so he put together a book where he captured, a lot of their life narratives, a lot of the things that influenced their criminality as juveniles. And he also captured the steps that they were taking while incarcerated to rehabilitate themselves, to make themselves worthy of a successful resentencing hearing. And he just captured a lot of the things that people who have life sentences or excessive prison sentences need to understand about themselves, and particularly what led to their crimes, and it was so we developed a book club of 10 individuals, and we try to have the participants mirror those that were covered in the book.
Oh, interesting.
We recruited participants who had life sentences, who were under the age of 25, to mirror the Supreme Court ruling in Miller versus Alabama decision, which said that the brain to mirror the science utilized by the Supreme Court justices, which says that the brain is still developing up until the age of 25. So we wanted participants who are under the age of 25 but who had life sentences. And so we had weekly groups where we read the Miller versus Alabama, the Miller's Children's book, and it gave us a reason to discuss things that we weren't accustomed to discussing openly. Because when you get incarcerated, one of the first things that people tell you is don't talk about your crime. For a lot of us, you know, we have this stuff in our head, but we never learn how to express it. We never learn how to look, how to identify what led to our crime. So the Miller Children Book Club, it created a safe space to where we can talk about the experiences that influenced our crimes, and our remorse, and what does redemption look like. And what we realized is that there was so much commonality
Mhm.
between us, and what we experienced, what we did, how we were trying to overcome it, and we wound up just forming a bond. We wound up forming, you know, a kindred group where we just supported each other from there on with our rehabilitative efforts, because we realized we were product of similar experiences. So that was really helpful for me because I went to the board closely thereafter, and a lot of those discussions, it helped me, be able to articulate my remorse, and my pursuit of redemption. So it was tremendous, and now we're trying to expand the book club in other facilities in New York.
That's amazing, and it really is a terrific book, and it sounds like it was a really powerful book for you. Um, as we start to wind down this conversation, I just wanted to go back to something that, for me, keeps coming up. You've been talking about individual transformation, and that, for me, invokes ideas about human dignity, and I know that faith and spirituality really played a big part of your journey. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about the meaning of human dignity in the context of criminal justice and criminal justice reform?
I think human dignity, what it looks like, what it should be, I think it's about treating incarcerated individuals in a way that facilitates their growth and their transformation.